Your VC says 5 words. Set up a Singapore Holdco. You nod. You assume it is a checkbox. A week of paperwork. A registered agent in Singapore. Done. Then 6 months later, you try to repatriate cash or you start planning an exit and you discover those 5 words committed you to a structure that touches your FEMA position, your cap table, your tax residency, and how much of your eventual exit you actually keep. I am C. Adityavikram Banka, Director at AS Banka Advisors Private Limited. Over the last 6 months, Singapore has become the single most asked cross-border question in our practice, ahead of Delaware. And almost every founder who walks in has already agreed to a Singapore Holdco without knowing which of two completely different structures they just signed up for. Here is the distinction nobody draws for you. Version 1 is the ODI Subsidiary. Your Indian company stays the parent. It sets up a Singapore company underneath it as a subsidiary using India's overseas direct investment route. You do this to sell into Southeast Asia, to hold intellectual property offshore, or to run a USD bank account. Your Indian company is still on top. This sits under India's FEMA Overseas Investment Rules of 2022. Version 2 is the flip, also called externalisation. Here the Singapore company becomes the parent and your Indian company becomes its subsidiary. You and your co-founders swap your Indian shares for shares in the Singapore Holdco. The entire cap table moves up one level. This is what most international VCs actually mean when they say Singapore Holdco, because they want to invest into a Singapore entity, not an Indian one. These two are not variations of the same thing. They are opposite directions of ownership, with opposite FEMA treatment, opposite tax consequences, and opposite reversal costs. Founders routinely execute version 2 while believing they did version 1. Why does the VC prefer Singapore over investing into India directly? Familiar company law, English language codes, and a deep double tax treaty network, and an easy path for the next investor and the eventual acquirer. Those are real advantages. The problem is never the destination. The problem is that the structure gets built before anyone models what it costs you, the Indian founder, in tax and compliance, both today and at exit. In the next chunk, I walk through the FEMA filings and the tax mechanics of the flip, including the one assumption about Singapore that is now completely wrong and quietly costs founders crores. Let us walk through what actually happens when you flip to a Singapore Holdco and where the real costs sit. Start with the share swap. You and your co-founders transfer your shares in the Indian company to the Singapore Holdco, and you receive Singapore shares in return. Indian tax law, that swap is a transfer. It can trigger capital gains in your hands today. On paper, even though no cash has changed hands, shares have to be valued by a registered valuer under the pricing guidelines, and the residents acquiring foreign shares have to report it. Reporting runs through Form FC filed with your authorized dealer bank within 30 days of the transaction. After that, the structure carries an annual obligation, the Annual Performance Report, the APR, due by the 31st of December every year. Sit, and you have a continuing FEMA contravention sitting under your next round of due diligence. Instead, it is your Indian company making an outbound investment, the ODI route. The total financial commitment is capped at 400% of your Indian company's net worth as per the last audited balance sheet. In Form FC, same 30-day window, same APR by the 31st of December. The assumption that is completely wrong. For years, founders were told that selling Indian company shares through a Singapore vehicle was capital gains free because the old India-Singapore Treaty exempted those gains in the seller's country. That exemption is gone. 2017 protocol to the India-Singapore Treaty ended it. For shares acquired on or after the 1st of April 2019, capital gains on Indian shares are taxed in India at the full Indian domestic rate. Shares acquired in the 2-year window just before that get a partial rate, and only genuinely old holdings are grandfathered. If your advisor is still pitching Singapore as a zero capital gains exit route, that advice is 6 years stale and it is dangerous. 2 more risks. Decide whether your Holdco survives scrutiny. Place of Effective Management, or POEM, under the Income Tax Act 2025. A foreign company is treated as resident in India and taxed in India on its worldwide income if its key management and commercial decisions are in substance made from India. If you run your Singapore Holdco off your laptop in Bengaluru with no real Singapore substance, the tax department can pull it back on shore. The directors, real board meetings, and real decisions in Singapore are not optional extras. They are the structure. Second, the general anti-avoidance rule and the treaty's own limitation of benefits clause. Holdco that exists only to access treaty benefits with no commercial substance behind it can have those benefits denied outright. The final chunk. When a Singapore Holdco genuinely makes sense, how repatriation and exit actually work, and the 5-step decision checklist. So when does a Singapore Holdco genuinely make sense? And when is it an expensive mistake? It makes sense when you have real international revenue or customers in Southeast Asia, when your lead investor will only deploy capital into a Singapore entity, when you are building toward a global acquirer who expects a Singapore or US parent, or when you genuinely intend to run substance, people and decisions out of Singapore. It is usually a mistake when your business, your team, your customers and your revenue are all in India, and the Holdco exists only because someone said it looks more fundable. In that case, you are paying real tax and compliance cost and taking on POEM and GAAR risk to solve a problem you do not actually have, and reversing it later. The reverse flip back to India is one of the most expensive corporate actions a startup can undertake. On repatriation, here is the good news on the Singapore side. Singapore runs a one-tier tax system. Dividends paid by a Singapore company to its shareholders carry no Singapore withholding tax for residents and non-residents alike. The Singapore corporate tax rate is a flat 17%, so cash can move up cleanly. The friction is on the India side and at your personal level, not on the Singapore dividend itself. Here is the 5-step decision checklist I run with every founder weighing a Singapore Holdco. 1. Name the actual goal. Market access, investor mandate, IP location or exit. The goal decides whether you need a subsidiary or a flip, and the two are not interchangeable. 2. Model the share swap tax today. Get a registered valuer number and calculate the capital gains. The flip triggers in the founder's hands before you commit, not after. 3. Map the FEMA obligations. Form FC within 30 days, APR by the 31st of December every year, and a named owner for those filings so they never lapse. 4. Pressure test substance. Can you genuinely place decision making in Singapore, or will POEM pull it back to India? If you cannot fund real substance, the structure is fragile. 5. Plan the exit and the reversal cost upfront. Know your capital gains position on a future sale under the current treaty, and know what it would cost to unwind if the plan changes. So VC has asked you to set up a Singapore Holdco. That 5-step review is the highest leverage hour you will spend this quarter. Schedule a strategy session. The link is in the description. The entity comparison tool on asbanka.com lets you compare the India, Singapore and Delaware structures side by side for free. And the FEMA compliance checklist pairs directly with this video. Next week's video breaks down the reverse flip, bringing a Delaware or Singapore startup back to India. Subscribe so you do not miss it.